Welcome everyone to Registrar Corp's mini MoCRA webinar today, where we will be focusing on good manufacturing practices and what that means under MoCRA. I'm Jacqueline Belomo, the Director of Cosmetic Services and Software at Registrar Corp. I support the team with regulatory guidance and requirements for cosmetics, as well as providing support on our Cosmetry Product Manager and GMP software. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a very large group, so very excited that everyone's excited about GMPs. We will first go into an overview of existing cosmetic GMPs, some key definitions to understand what that means under MoCRA. We'll also discuss some GMP basics, considerations for GMPs, and how to understand their requirements. We'll also be going over the understanding the FDA process, what that enforcement looks like, and then preparing for GMPs. What does that look like as a responsible person? What does it look like as a facility? And lastly, we'll be answering some questions and just reviewing some other details about the timeline. So some key MoCRA definitions. In MoCRA, there was some updates to some existing definitions. So identifying what will be considered a cosmetic product is an important definition, as this determines the regulations that you will need to follow for compliance, especially under GMPs. The existing definition of a cosmetic under FDA was articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or spread on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body or any part thereof for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance, and articles intended for use as a component of such articles. MoCRA introduces a new definition for cosmetic products, which the term cosmetic product means preparation of cosmetic ingredients with a qualitative and quantitative set of composition for use in a finished product. And just to refresh everyone, the term cosmetic ingredient means any single chemical entity or mixture used as a component in the manufacturing of a cosmetic product. Our star for the day, MoCRA introduces the term facility with respect to cosmetic firms and products with a very specific definition. The term facility includes any establishment, including the establishment of an importer that manufactures or processes cosmetic products distributed in the United States. So very, very important, the terminology used here: manufacturing, processing of a cosmetic product that's distributed in the United States. The facility will be responsible for facility registration and GMP compliance issued with FDA. There are some exclusions and exemptions, and we'll speak about those today. Under the draft guidance that was issued back in August, the FDA defined operator and owner as it relates to a cosmetic facility. So the term operator means a person who has management authority over the establishment, and the term owner means the person who has ownership interest in the establishment. MoCRA formalizes and enhances the definition of an adulterated cosmetic, which would be one that bears or contains any poisonous or deleterious substance, which may render it injurious to users under the conditions of use prescribed on the labeling. Its container is composed of any poisonous or deleterious substance, which may render the contents injurious to health. It consists in whole or in part any filthy, putrid, or decomposed substance, and it has been prepared, packed, or held in insanitary conditions whereby maybe have become contaminated with filth. It contains a color additive which is unsafe or unimproved. MoCRA adds to this definition to include the following: if it has been manufactured or processed under conditions that do not meet good manufacturing practices requirements section 606 under MoCRA, which is our good manufacturing practices. So very, very important to note that any cosmetic product that is not manufactured or processed under FDA's compliance with GMPs will be considered adulterated. We will talk later about what that means in terms of enforcement as well from FDA. So now that we have a good understanding of those key definitions, we're going to get into the requirements themselves. I thought it would be really great to start with the basics around good manufacturing practice. So FDA regulates other industries very closely to ensure the quality of the products in the manufacturing of drugs and medical devices. Cosmetics has somewhat been left behind as FDA has not had a set regulation on GMPs for cosmetics. FDA regulates the quality of cosmetics that are also drugs very carefully. So your SPF foundations that are drugs that are cosmetics are regulated the same way as drugs, but cosmetics has truly been left behind. Other countries, as we'll discuss, have put into place good manufacturing practices for cosmetics. Just to give some basics here, good manufacturing practices assures the identity, strength, quality, and purity of the products that are being manufactured. GMPs focus on establishing strong quality management systems, obtaining appropriate quality raw materials, establishing robust operating procedures, detecting and investigating product quality deviations, and then maintaining reliable testing. So the whole focus of GMP is this strong quality management system and having things in place that you're able to follow procedures, and that if there happens to be an issue, you're able to quickly detect and investigate a problem and have a course of action on how to correct it. Before MoCRA, again, FDA did not regulate GMPs for cosmetics, regardless of a domestic or a foreign facility. So meaning that if you were manufacturing in Paris and you shipped your products to the United States, that facility in Paris did not have any GMPs per FDA that they had to comply with. So very important to note that a lot of foreign facilities were manufacturing, processing cosmetics that were distributed in the United States that had no compliance connected to them. FDA did issue a draft guidance for industry that focused on good manufacturing practices for cosmetics, but this was not a mandatory regulation that facilities had to follow. The latest revision of this guidance was issued in 2013 with elements of ISO 22716, which is that European Union standard, and that is actually required for all cosmetic products that are sold within the EU. FDA has announced that it intends to withdraw or revise the draft of guidance based on this GMP rulemaking. So very important that this draft guidance will have a revision or pull it completely. It was the guidance was issued to assist industry and other stakeholders in identifying the standards and to understand the risks when manufacturing cosmetic products that can actually affect the quality of the cosmetic products. So this really was the guidance. It was to assist industry, but now moving forward, as we will see with MoCRA, that will be changing. A lot of questions around what do the terms manufacturing and processing mean under MoCRA. So MoCRA introduces that term facility with respect to cosmetic firms, and then has that specific terminology, those that manufacture or process a cosmetic product. So you might be asking, what do the terms manufacturing and process mean under MoCRA? So FDA has provided guidance for these terms in that draft guidance that was issued a few months ago. And FDA currently defines cosmetic manufacturing and processing of a cosmetic product as engaging in one or more steps in the making of any cosmetic product by chemical, physical, biological, or other procedures, including manipulation, sampling, testing, or control procedures applied to the product. FDA does not clearly define that last section of testing or controlled procedures. I know a lot of public comment went out on that draft guidance to include that language and to properly address the terminology for the manipulation, sampling, testing, and control procedures. Because as we all know, there is tons of manipulation, sampling, and testing that does go on. Most testing facilities that should not be considered most testing labs that should not be considered facilities. What does this mean to them? Does this classify as that testing part? The controlled procedures, does this mean that their warehousing would be subject to these responsibilities as well? So So hopefully this final guidance that FDA issues will give us a clear understanding of that last section, because it kind of doesn't align with the idea of what they had around the facility registration and those facilities that had to register. Since good manufacturing practices compliance focus on several aspects such as the premises, the equipment, production process, storage, cosmetic facilities that have not had their manufacturing practices regulated before could experience a lot of change to their practices, facility, and staff to become compliant with GMP. For this reason, FDA has made sure to give enough time for the proposed rulemaking and final rulemaking. So you'll see notice of proposed rulemaking within 2 years and final rule within 3 years. So we're looking at that proposed rulemaking December 29th, 2024. MoCRA's regulations are specific that focus on GMPs that must be on requirements needed to protect the public health and to ensure that cosmetic products are not adulterated. So very important about the definition of adulterated product before. GMPs for facilities should also be consistent to the extent practicable and appropriate with national and international standards. Most of industry is very worrisome of the cosmetic good manufacturing practices differing too greatly from other standards such as ISO 22716 and creating a different practice requiring an overhaul to all factories that currently follow GMP for cosmetics and have to introduce a new standard. So very important to note that cosmetic products that are already being manufactured in facilities that sell in other countries with those GMP standards are worried of what that will look like on a larger scale. Again, facilities that produce cosmetic products that also produce medical devices and drugs is still subject to that cosmetic GMP. So just to say that again, if you have a facility that makes cosmetics that are drugs, so SPF foundations, and then just a foundation, you will be subject to both the cosmetic GMP and also the drug GMP. So much like that registration part, they want to make sure that it stays consistent with the regulation of where the product falls. FDA considerations for GMP. So this is really important because under MoCRA, FDA has added specific language to how they plan to map out GMP process, what will be included, what elements that they will be taking. And FDA has added that language and added consultation requirements with industry and other stakeholders before issuing the regulation. So very important that FDA is going to take into account the size and scope of a business engaged in the manufacture of cosmetic products, and then FDA to provide sufficient flexibility to be practicable for all sizes and types of facilities. FDA will consult with contract manufacturers, consumer organizations, and other experts to understand the scope and what this means to industry, especially for those who already account for GMP requirements in other countries and those that have not had any GMP requirements in their current business. FDA did hold a public listening session back in June, which had a large turnout. Thousands of people of industry leaders spoke their concern, their preference of standards, as well as consideration for educational years for all of industry. Consensus of the industry it was that they would like consideration from FDA to adopt that ISO 22716 standard to ensure that all practices are aligned. But again, FDA, when they issued their 2013 guidance update that had some parts of 22716, there was a lot of updates that did have to occur. So there is a lot of question if ISO 22716 standard really answers all of the public health concerns that FDA has from facilities manufacturing and processing cosmetics, not just domestically, but globally. For water validation, huge question that has to be answered in that 22716 standard. But again, FDA has this 2 years from that proposed rule. Well, given the time that we are in right now, they have about a year and some months for that proposed rule. So there is time for public to continue to comment and add the concerns of the industry. MoCRA kind of outlines that they want to take account for that size and that scope and the businesses engaged, because meaning that a larger facility and brand will have the ability with finances and personnel, and even have training to adhere to GMP compliance easier than a facility that is of a smaller scale with personnel that perform multiple roles within the company. Again, GMPs are designed to assure the identity, strength, quality, and purity of the products being manufactured. So they need to review the scope. They need to review what the facilities are producing and making, and understand the risk that is involved with public health involved for all sizes of facilities. Other considerations are taken. Again, we're going to talk next about the small business exemption and what that kind of means. Coming up next. So just to kind of level set everybody, FDA will take into account small businesses and provide some of that flexibility for simplified requirements or exemptions. FDA defines a small business as those with average gross annual sales in the U.S. for a previous 3-year period totaling less than $1 million. Small businesses that do not engage in manufacturing or processing of certain cosmetics, which we'll talk about next, can be exempt from certain regulations that are included for product listings, registration listings, and GMP. And then again, we'll only have to maintain adverse event record keeping for 3 years. These exemptions are intended to help make sure that small businesses are able to grow in the United States. FDA knows that there are many indie brands, many indie facilities that are growing in the United States, and they don't want to take away that advantage to them by creating GMPs that are too restrictful or that are a financial burden on the company. So very important to note that this was mentioned. So one thing that is really important to know, and we got this question a lot, is that small business exemption, regardless of the average gross annual sales, businesses that engage in manufacturing or processing the following are not exempt from the registration listing requirements and not exempt from GMP. So very important: cosmetics that come in contact with mucous membrane of the eye under conditions of use that are customary usual, cosmetic products that are injected, cosmetic products that are intended for internal use, and cosmetic products that are intended to alter the appearance for more than 24 hours under conditions of use that are customary usual, and removal by the consumer is not part of such conditions. So these 4 bullets is regardless of that annual sales, you will not be exempt from registration, listing, and will probably have to follow a more stringent GMP process because of the risk of public health concern with these types of products. So as an example, cosmetic products that are injected, think about your tattoo inks. Cosmetic products that come in contact with the eye, I mean, that is like the highest concern in a facility, is all types of eye products because of the chance of micro concerns, contaminations. The mucous membrane of the eye is one of the most delicate pieces that is touched during a cosmetic product. So very important to understand that these 4 bullet points run the largest risk to public health, which is why FDA called these out specifically. So what does it mean for GMP for small business exemption? So FDA must include simplified good manufacturing practice requirements for smaller businesses. They must ensure that GMP regulations do not impose undue economic hardship, and they may include longer compliance time. And then FDA will consult with smaller businesses. So that was a big key in MoCRA, was FDA stating their next steps and stating how they will handle the small business exemptions, especially understanding the size, again, and scope of the business. We will now get into a little bit of enforcement for the next few slides. So as we all know, FDA has long had the authority to inspect cosmetic facilities under Section 704 of the FD&C Act. MoCRA adds specific record access provisions for FDA inspections. That does go into effect December 29th, 2023, so of this year. So very important for any facilities that do not have certain records in place, certain SOPs in place, adverse event record keeping in place. That also goes into effect as December 29th. It's very important to understand this record access provision for FDA inspections. So FDA now has the authority to access records relating to a cosmetic product under certain circumstances. So if the secretary has reasonable belief that a cosmetic product, including an ingredient in such cosmetic product and other cosmetic products, that the secretary reasonably believes is likely to be affected in a similar manner or is likely to be adulterated, such that the use or exposure to a product presents or threats a serious adverse health consequence or death to humans, each responsible person and facility shall allow FDA access to these records. So very important to note that this language means that if there is a product that is causing a public adverse event public health concern, that FDA can come and inspect and have access to these records. There are limitations on what records FDA can access. It doesn't have access to cosmetic formulas and recipes, administrative or research data, but they will have access to the safety substantiation data. They'll have access to your manufacturing data. FDA does not have inspection authority, again, over any financial data or sales data, but they are able to request a list of ingredients in a product's flavor or fragrance if they feel it's contributed to a serious adverse event. So very big for industry to understand the responsibilities here. So a responsible person on a pack is responsible for receiving adverse events and for reporting serious adverse events to FDA. Very important for facilities to understand the responsible person's record keeping and serious adverse event reporting of adverse events if that product is being made at their facility. Contract manufacturing and responsible person, this intertwinedness during MoCRA is very important. Knowing that an inspection would happen if there's a serious public health concern, starts with the responsible person's records, reviews their records, and then next step is that facility and their records. So very important to have a process in place for the adverse event receiving and reporting that the contract manufacturer themselves can receive. One thing to note as well is that FDA has now the ability to suspend a facility's registration, requiring the facility to cease distribution of all cosmetic products at the facility. And this is, of course, if FDA determines a cosmetic product is manufactured or processed by a registered facility and distributed in the United States, has a reasonable probability of causing a serious adverse health consequence, or there is a reasonable belief that other products manufactured or processed by the facility may be affected as well because of failure that cannot be isolated to a product or products manufactured by the facility. So very, very important that you speak. If you are a contract manufacturer, you speak to your responsible person about their adverse event receiving, record keeping, and reporting, that you are included in that part because you can be subject to this inspection as well. A lot of these reports will help determine if an event is isolated or if the event affects other failures in the field. Many times when there is an isolated event, it's easily, reported to FDA and it's solved within the responsible person and the consumer that had that adverse event. If it is not an isolated event, if it is a national concern, a public concern that is happening in all lots of that product across all retailers, then the facility also has a responsibility to understand what bulk is on hand, what finished pieces are at hand, and what distribution centers that the product was shipped in. Most factories do have a complaints and recall plan, so very important to take a look at that. Make sure that has language around the responsible person, what their role would be in this. Now, technically, the responsible person is in charge of that recall. They are supposed to make sure all pieces are returned, refunded. But most of the time, these responsible persons that use contract manufacturers don't have warehouses, don't have DCs, and rely heavily on the facilities. So make sure your facility, if you are a facility, that you have that in place, and vice versa with a responsible person. Make sure there is something in place to make sure you can properly receive the adverse events, know how to keep those records, and report any serious adverse events, and communicate with your contract manufacturers. Before suspending a facility's registration, FDA will provide notice and an opportunity for the facility to be heard at an informal hearing. And in regard to mandatory recall, if FDA determines there is a reasonable probability that a cosmetic is adulterated or misbranded, or the use of exposure of the cosmetic will cause serious adverse health consequences or death, the Secretary shall provide the responsible person with the opportunity to voluntarily cease distribution and recall such cosmetic product, or the FDA may issue a mandatory recall. So really, really important. I know we are running 5 minutes until the end of time, but I am happy to stay on to go through the last few slides and to of course, answer some questions. So if you have to drop, we're going to continue the recording, but everyone willing to stay on, I'm here so we can answer some questions. Getting into preparing for GMP. So first, we need to wait for FDA to issue GMP proposed rule making and that final rule. To understand the full scope of GMPs, but there are steps to take right now to help prepare your team for GMPs. First and foremost is to determine the personnel in the facility that will be responsible for GMP compliance, maintaining SOPs, and handling audits. My biggest thing is review your current SOPs and your internal audit practices. This is where you see where there might be some gaps, there might be some issues. Important to start to educate those that are responsible for GMP on compliance and current guidelines. Evaluate who needs additional training. The biggest is the gap analysis to identify what issues or what gaps there are in the current GMP process. So I say that because, without continuous auditing, without having a process in place, there might be many chances where there's gaps in a process. My best example is, waste bins. There's an audit process around waste bins and how often they are disposed. So doing that audit process and seeing, well, it's disposed of every 5 hours, but then at hour 3, you're seeing it's overflown and causing a mess on the floor. So that's like the best example I can have for like processes and analysis of how to maintain certain parts of your premises. Again, without knowing final guidance, it's so hard to just say this is how it's going to be. But I highly encourage, for those to little to no understanding of GMP, it'd be very wise to begin to take online training courses to give intro and beginning information on good manufacturing practices, understanding the terminology of the practices and processes that might be new for a lot of cosmetic employees. And then important to take note and evaluate the business overall's understanding of GMPs and how your company can take that action now, because it's important to review current SOPs. When were they last written? How can this, how can you include additional SOPs? Are there outdated cleaning procedures? Are there improper storage and overall layout of the facility need updating? These are the things that, yourself and your staff should be thinking about as a facility, because all these factors are going to focus on the requirements needed to protect that public health and ensure cosmetic products are not adulterated, not contaminated. So, big picture is knowing first who is responsible and do they have the right education, the right training to properly take the next steps in reviewing the overall process in a facility. So preparing for inspections and record access as well. So, make sure proper SOPs are in place and reviewed by all departments and personnel that would be involved in an inspection of a facility. Very, very important. A lot of times in facilities, SOPs are written and not everybody who's involved in the SOP sees it, or they have seen it and just signed it and not understand their role in the SOP. So very important to review the SOPs, Call out what departments are responsible, personnel that's responsible, so they have an understanding if there's an inspection, what their role is. So some examples of SOPs that are important to have in place is, personal hygiene, the premises, production, storage, record keeping, out of spec products, and complaints and recalls plan. Uh, because MoCR adds that specific record access provision for FDA inspections, ensure all aspects of the cosmetic product safety substantiation is properly documented. Chances are, if you're having an inspection, this will be probably one of the, and there's a public health concern, this will probably be one of the questions that, FDA asks us to see. Have a list of all ingredients that are in the fragrance and flavors of a cosmetic product ready. Train staff to know what documents and record access FDA is allowed to access during an inspection. So very important, to know what they do have access to and do not have access to, because when FDA does come and there is an inspection, having someone not prepared or not having the right documentation could, be to a disadvantage, which again, why it's so important to organize and create records for each cosmetic product that FDA has access to. So very, very important to know what they're allowed to access and what it means when they come on site for that inspection. Some common questions. Again, we talked about the public listening on June 1st, thousands of people from industry. And then again, something that we get a lot of is, cosmetic GMP standards apply to both establishments that manufacture cosmetic products as well as establishments that manufacture only cosmetic ingredients. I get this question probably 15 times a week. So the terminology is for cosmetic products that manufactures or processes. But if you are a cosmetic ingredient supplier, please, please, please know your process in a finished cosmetic good. If your cosmetic ingredient is being used as a cosmetic product, if there's blends that you're using as a final cosmetic product, all of these things are important for you to know, because if you technically are creating a cosmetic product, you would have to register. So very important to evaluate your product line, how your customers are using your products. If you're a cosmetic ingredient house that makes bulk that then eventually gets a fragrance to it or gets a color to it, you technically have a finished cosmetic product. So very, very important to kind of review all of that information. And again, everyone's going to get these slides after the presentation, but again, who's responsible? Always important, to take a big picture look of who does what under MoCRA. And then, of course, our wonderful timeline that it helps us get through the next few years of MoCRA. So I'm going to open up for Q&A. Again, please, also reach out and contact if there's further information. So yeah, let's get back into a few questions. For small businesses, does it apply to Canadian companies selling in the US? Yes. So that small business exemption applies for everyone who is manufacturing and processing cosmetics distributed in the United States. So very, very important that even if you're a foreign facility, that you will have to comply with the GMPs as well as product listings and registration. So regardless of where you are, if your products are being sold in the US and distributed in the US, they will have to comply with these regulations. Is there more specific information regarding the products that are in contact with the eye? For example, with cosmetics such as shadows, liners, creams. So great question. We get this a lot as well. My rule of thumb is if the product is intended to be used on the eye, so instructions of use are an eyeliner, a mascara, an eye primer, eyelash extenders, anything that is instructed to be used on the eye as that product, you should consider that comes in regular contact with the eye. Also, anything that helps remove eye products is also considered something that will come in contact with the eye. So very important to review your products and the use instructions of those products, because that will help determine if those products are in contact with the eye. And more importantly, will help you also establish the terminology on your instructions and having to maybe add in language somewhere about a warning statement of not coming in contact with eyes and something of that nature. But yeah, so I would consider anything that's an eye product or anything that helps remove an eye product. I would fall into those buckets as well. Let's see. I'll answer a few more questions. So, yes, the slides will be sent after, as well as the recording and some helpful links as well. We do offer some online training courses with GMP under ISO 22716. We even have a course that provides SOP templates. So you'll be getting the links to that, as well as the slide deck and recording. We'll be holding more, as the GMPs advance and as they get larger. Or as they get more defined with the rule processing and public comment, we'll be sure to have another session. For GMPs are very, very popular, so we hope to keep continuing the conversation. So here's a question about contract manufacturer. I'm a contract manufacturer. We sell to responsible persons who sell in the U.S. How do we know if somebody is selling in the U.S. or does not need to sell in the U.S.? So I think your question is, if you are a contract manufacturer, foreign facility, you're manufacturing for a responsible person and you have no idea if they're selling into the United States. So chances are, the labeling of the product and the compliance of the product will kind of lead you to understand if that product's being sold in the United States. But your first step is to make sure you have these conversations with your responsible person. What products are being sold in the United States, because a part of your facility registration is to list all of the responsible persons and products being made at your facility. Though your FEI number is going to land on a product listing page. So very important that you have these conversations now with your responsible person. Because if they are selling in the United States and you were unaware of that, and you miss adding them to your list for your facility registration and they add you to their list, that's going to cause a very long stream of questions and maybe even rejections in the portal. Yesterday, FDA just released the updated SPL submission guide, and as the 280 pages I've gotten through, there is some concern about listing responsible persons correctly on a product listing and a facility registration. So definitely have that conversation now to make sure everyone is aligned. We'll answer one more question. We are a facility manufacturing undertaking contract manufacturing for our principals who want to sell in the United States. We do not conduct business in the United States. Where does this place us? Do we need to register with FDA? So yes, if you are manufacturing products to responsible persons that are selling in the US, but you technically do not conduct that business, but your products at your facility are making it to the US, you do need to register with FDA. A lot of what they are trying to do is establish that same universal system that is held in other companies to register domestic and foreign facilities. It's important to understand the supply chain process and everything that goes into a product, where it's made, what country it's made, who the responsible person is. This will help track all of that visibility into products and where they're manufactured. So it's very important to understand that even if you're manufacturing in another country and you are not the one conducting business, you still need to register. So I just want to thank everyone. I thoroughly enjoy talking about GMPs. I'm sure you can tell during our conversation. We have such exciting, MoCRA sessions coming up as well throughout the next year. So please stay tuned. If you have questions, again, about any manufacturing or processing of a cosmetic product, what it means to you, if you need help with any of your registration, please reach out to us. We are happy to help, happy to answer questions to the best of our ability, and hoping to help everyone through this next year of MoCRA. Thank you, everyone, once again.